Hi, and welcome to Legally Insane News. I'm your host, Kyle O'Donnell. Find and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Kyle O'Donnell, and head over to legallyinsanefilms.com to listen to my other podcasts, to read my books and articles, to check out my photos from around the world, and to watch my documentary films. Again, that's legallyinsanefilms.com. Today I'm talking to Katherine Sheffield. She's the host of Few Bad Apples, which is a podcast with a focus on police reform. You know, something near and dear to my heart for sure. She started her show in June of last year, so she's been on the air for nearly a year now, compiling more than 30 shows in that time. So it's a lot of research and studio time, so she's a busy lady. I want to thank her for taking an hour out of her time today to meet with me. She's a military wife living in Hawaii. She completed her doctorate in educational leadership, and she's currently a teacher. Katherine, thanks so much for joining the show. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you for having me on.
So I'll jump right in. Given the state of police-civilian relations these days, I'm pretty sure your show must turn a few heads. So I'm kind of curious, do you ever get, kind of run into criticism on your show?
I was actually surprised that I don't receive any criticism. If anything, I've been commended for doing this. I've had a lot of people really thank me for taking the time to look into some of the cases. And I think it's because I have a neutral approach to it. And for the record, I'm actually a big supporter of police. And my goal is not to bash them, but if anything, it's to inform. And so I think people are seeing that there are problems that constantly get overlooked. And by sharing these stories, we're going to keep telling them, like, hey, there's this and there's that. And hopefully it'll provoke some change somewhere. So to answer your question, no, I haven't gotten any negative response about the show. But, and I do try to end the show on a positive note. I do always highlight a story of the week about a good officer, and it might not be relevant to the story at all, but it's to balance, to show that there are good people out there doing good things in the community.
Yeah, and I noticed that about your shows. That's, that was actually one of my questions later on. And maybe I'll tap into that later, but, and you also answered another one of my questions. I was kind of curious how you have seen the support for your show kind of manifest itself over the course of the last year. I mean, has anything stood out for having been commended? Any town commissioners call you up and say, "Oh my God, you led us to whatever,"
If anything, I think the podcast has opened up some opportunities to explore for positive reform. I had an organization called Missing Pieces, and they reached out to me, and I did an interview with them, which was actually my first interview, but they were able to share how my show was going to help spread the word about their creation. They had a database where the public can upload their materials, such as like police reports or anything like that. And with that database, it will do a little bit of tracking. So if we had a bad encounter with the police, it would kind of track that officer. And if he ever resigns and then someone else in another state puts in some documentation, it would like track it. And it's a new development. So I think the show has helped kind of put forth what the possibility of new technology will be in terms of addressing this systemic problem. So I think it's really exciting to see that there are organizations that are interested in using the show as a positive means for reform.
Now, are you? I'm curious because there was one episode that stood out. I didn't have time to listen to it in my research, but I definitely was curious about it. It was called Missing Peace, the interview with Crystal Sills and Dr. Giovanni Felton.
Yeah, that was the one. Those were the two individuals that created this, and they reached out to me, and they're like, this is our new technology. We really, they want to launch it, and they thought that the show was a good fit for it. And when talking to them, our core values aligned. They were not anti-police, but they are very much for reform. And so that is why we were able to sit down and talk and to share what the public can do in order to kind of help out with the reform, you know what I mean? Because it
Mm-hmm.
starts from the ground up. And so if someone has a negative complaint, they might be afraid to go against the police. They might be afraid to, who are they going to report it to? And so the database serves kind of as their, like, a middleman approach where it's, you know, completely confidential, but then they'll do all the tracking and research. And I was really interested in that. I've never heard of anything like that before.
Yeah.
So that's why we were able to kind of unpack what the database is in that interview and hopefully spread the word that it exists, because not many people did know that it did.
And so I don't want to get too much into the details because I'm sure folks can just come listen to that episode. But this is a national database, so it can be done anywhere from any community?
Yes, I believe so. I don't really know too much about how it works, but I do believe it was national. They're encouraging anyone who's had a negative encounter with the police to come forth and go to their website. And I have it linked on the episode because I don't know the link off the top of my head. But if you go to the missing piece interview, the link should be there, and then you can upload your info and it would be confidential.
Really quick, how do people actually find your podcast and if you have any blog or social media space out there, how can people find you?
Oh yeah, I'm available anywhere you get your podcast: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of it, Google, and my link is the name of the show is A Few Bad Apples, but I have a link tree, so if anyone knows that, it's linktr.ee/A Few Bad Apples, and that should take you to any of my social media, Patreon, all of the above. So hopefully, if you're having a hard time finding it, just search A Few Bad Apples podcast, and then it should pop up.
Yeah, as I recall, your the copy and paste part of the the Twitter sphere that got me to you was Few Apples. Is that right?
Yes, that's my Few Apples is my Twitter username.
Yeah, that one's nice and easy. I was hoping you'd plug that one, but I'll let you do your own plug-in. So I'm also curious at the very beginning of this thing, how rewind the tape to the onset of your interest. How did you get into the field of police reform, and why, kind of what made you take that message into the podosphere?
Well, I'll be honest with you, I've never had a podcast experience before this, so it was kind of a COVID experiment because I'm a teacher and we were out of school since March of 2020. I really had a lot of time at home, and I had this idea. I was like, looking at the news every day, almost it felt like every day, there was some use of excessive force. And it got me really thinking that we're having a problem here. There's a problem. This can't be normalized. And then I said, well, I'm just going to give this a shot. And I didn't know where it was going to go. And here we are. It's almost a year later, and we're already into season 2. So it's kind of a crazy journey.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And what other? I'm trying to figure out how to frame this question. When you decided to take this journey, what else was there out there? And I'll tell you the source of this question. I recall your PhD is in education. So in that, did you have any portion of your foci dedicated to police reform, any kind of legal field, law, anything like that?
Actually, no. And that's a good question. Actually, no. My dissertation was on military children, and primarily in middle school. So it was not relevant to the podcast at all. However, the only thing that I could say I got from the dissertation program the doctoral program, is the fact that I really became a skilled researcher. And so I take a lot of pride in the research, and I do try to cite my sources as I'm telling the story, just because I'm really about, giving credit where the information came from. but I do think I've obtained such good research skills, and that's why I think people trust the show. And if I ever get anything wrong, I want people to tell me, hey, that's not exactly how it goes, because it's really a matter of me taking multiple sources and constructing a coherent story. Because a lot of times the newspapers will be really limited in the details that they provide, and so I need to go back and find more sources to explain. And so a lot of times it's me constructing what I think is clear on what happened. And so that's something that's challenging. But I think my doctoral program really helped in building me to become this insightful researcher.
Indeed, yeah, it was pleasant hearing you say that. You're talking to a career journalist and journalism professor, and if I had 1/10 of my students already there and prepared to take the leap and give credit where credit's due and things like that, my job would be basically babysitting. So
you would just facilitate in that process. Yeah, no, I seriously struggle with that even when teaching my own students. I really try to push them to please give credit where it's due. You did not know this information until you looked at, a specific source. And so, I would never have known the story if I didn't go to the source. So there's no way that I can claim I knew that.
Yeah, one might argue that there's a pretty sizable and widespread issue with that today. Nationwide. And speaking of the widespread need for things, would you consider the need for police reform to be widespread?
I do. I think it is widespread. And actually, I am talking to an organization, a nonprofit organization in California. They are the Institute for Criminal Justice Training Reform, and they are advocating for training at the start. So if an officer or a person who wants to join the police force, they have to go through a lengthy process, but once they get admitted into the police, they have to go through the academy, and that's where the training is. And the organization is advocating for change at the beginning, because I didn't know this, but police actually receive such limited training. It's very short. It depends on the department. So, some might have longer than others, but it needs to be a little bit refined, I guess, and to go in and maybe extend it, maybe make it a little bit longer, because we're not going to just train them and send them on their way. There are things now that we're seeing that those things that they're kind of bypassing are problems. And so that's what the organization is all about, and I'm hoping soon I can get some materials to push out, just even on my Twitter, just to inform the public that, this is where we can start. If we want training reform, we can start from the beginning.
That's good. That's good to hear that you're putting out roots as well, and reaching out and making those connections. I'm sure you'll find that, you also seem very dedicated to this, which is great, because a lot of people, myself included, find it hard to pick one thing and stick with it. And so,
yeah.
But as a researcher as well, as a journalist, I'm able to do a bunch of different things. It's great because I get to do a bunch of different projects I'm interested in. However, I'm insanely jealous of people who can focus on one thing and do it well and make those connections. Those are the people that create grassroots change. And I just sort of record it and talk about it as a journalist. So I'm jealous for sure. And another thing that you mentioned that was interesting to me was I dated many moons ago a girl who was a hairstylist, and she cut all the cops' hair. And in her conversations, she found out, this was in Virginia. I don't know how it works in every state, but in Virginia, hairstylists go through more training than cops do, and all they're doing is cutting hair. They're not wielding weapons, and putting people's lives in their hands. So there's a something very, very weighty to levy some interest to what you just said. So I appreciate you.
Right.
I appreciate you going there with that.
Right. I was actually going to say that, and I kind of went off on a tangent, but I was going to mention that, and that was what the founder of the organization told me. And it's actually alarming, because that's not the way it should be. And I think the misconception that the public might have is that police have this extensive amount of training, and they do receive training, and it depends on what it is at a certain time. I know that they don't just go once and that's it. I know that they receive some training during their time on the force, but is it enough, or is it specific?
Hold that thought. Legally Insane News will be right back.
I know that they receive some training during their time on the force, but is it enough, or is it specific? Because the founder was telling me that a lot of the things they learn is to prepare, for that do or die moment. And I mean, do we really want to be training them to be living like that, almost in fear, to have these negative encounters? I think we do need to implement a lot of mental health tactics on how to respond to these calls. And a lot of my episodes do focus on people who are experiencing mental health issues, and had they responded properly, or at least had some indication or had some other resource to bring to that particular call, I think maybe they wouldn't end the way that they do.
Indeed. Yeah. And I'm going to take that a step further and say, I think one of the major crises in, I'll say, conflict with the law is based and rooted in mental health. And I think America just flat out has an issue with mental health that is very, very commonly misunderstood or mistaken as a gun issue or a religious issue, or any number of things that we could just go right to the source and say, okay, let's think about what the state of this or these individuals are at that time, and see if we can't fix something about the situation before we put cops who are not psychologists, psychiatrists, or trained in psychiatry in any way, put into those situations. My personal opinion, and I normally don't inject this type of thing in somebody else's interview, but cops should never be called for psychological problems, ever. A shrink or someone else who is trained in mental health should be called to deal with or intervene in those kinds of issues.
Right, and I will be talking about that in the episode I'm releasing tomorrow. I'm doing a double episode where I'm doing two stories, and both gentlemen were experiencing mental health issues, and both of them ended fatally. So, and in some of the research that I like to present before I get into the story is that they do receive quite a large number of calls for these mental health problems, I should say, because, people think, oh, well, they have to be trained. They don't know who to turn to. And I feel like maybe that's another problem in itself, that is there should be maybe a dispatcher or something should be trained in knowing how to divert that call to the right resource. I don't know. I mean, we could speculate many ways to fix this problem, but right. I think starting from training would be the best way to do that.
Yeah. I have one of my degrees is in psych. That was inspired by my mom, who is, or at least was, and is now a retired psychiatrist. The understanding in her field, and all while growing up, is that these are two separate issues. Crime, even in the courts, is differentiated between crime and psychological crises. So, why would a call to 911 be any different? The common conversation should be, in my opinion, perhaps you share this, that we need a psychological police, so to speak. Maybe just a division of, whenever you call 911, you can get fire, you can get ambulance, you can get, first responders, you can get police. You should also be able to get something involved with a mental health professional.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of communities do that. I don't mean to, snub organizations that are already involved in that, but certainly there needs to be more of that.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely agree. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if it is even happening, I think it should be more widespread, but I'm not actually sure if it is a thing, Mm-hmm. And I think that would be a great place to start, because there are so many problems There are so many people experiencing these things. And unfortunately for the police, and I have to look at it from two sides, they might not, they see a person with a weapon. They're not maybe, sure what's going on. And so they might not know that there is a mental health problem. Just like the story I'll share on Monday with Christian Hall. He was 19 years old. He was having some maybe suicidal thoughts, and he did have a gun. But when they asked him to put the gun down, he complied, and he had his hands up. Unfortunately, where the twist in the story is, the police were very quick to put out a record, a statement about what happened. They shot him, but they said it's because Christian did not comply. He picked up the gun and pointed it at them. They did not know at that time that there were bystanders recording, and you don't see any of that. So I think they could take a mental health issue and kind of flip it as well, to convey that the narrative the way that they want to. And in this case, the boy was having some issues, and his family was aware that there were problems, but all he really needed was help. And it just didn't turn out that way, or it didn't even seem like they cared. They acknowledged he was having maybe possible suicide thoughts, but they flipped the script on him and shot him 7 times.
Right. Yeah.
And so I feel like, and this is so relevant, he's Asian American too, and there's that issue in itself with what's going on right now. So I feel like we need something to happen and soon, because the problem is getting out of control.
Well, and I'm going to kind of throw out a spoiler alert. I'm not going to give away too many of the details, but I really did enjoy the episode about John Gear, and this conversation we're having right now kind of runs tandem with that. You go into some really deep detail into the private life of the officer and focus here. And again, I'll leave out the finite details on that, but it's just being reminded of that. I'm curious, how do you begin your research, and how do you tie that into your shows? And specifically, I'm asking this because there are ways to find out all of the detail that goes into your show, right? You don't know these people, you don't have a personal relationship with them, but the information is available out there somewhere. How do you research it? What are some keys and tools that people can access to get into those same places? And not to give away your secrets to make your show a success, but how can people find the real stories?
It's actually really hard, and sometimes I'll start off with just a basic storyline from like the New York Times. The New York Times is pretty thorough. It'll start off with a small local paper, and I'll just say it gives you the outline of the story, and it will intrigue me, and so I'll go digging, and I'll keep Google searching the person's name and doing it over and over and over until I find other people who are involved, and then I Google search their name. So basically I go down this spiral of trying to find out everyone who is involved. And sometimes I fear that the story is not clear because I have to go through multiple lenses to make the story what it is. And in that case, the John Gear, as I kept digging and digging and digging, at some point it started talking about not John Gear anymore, but just the officer. And so that intrigued me. So that's how I was able to find out about his background and how there were a lot of problems there, and someone just let him keep working, even though he himself was coming to his commander saying, I don't think I can work today. I'm having these problems. And they were just like, okay, you don't have to work. And then they'll send him back out tomorrow. And he did that several times, like 3 times. And so I just kept finding this nugget of information, and then it kept growing and growing. And I'm not always that lucky in terms of trying to present the story. And sometimes I feel like the stories are too short, but sometimes there's just not enough out there. Right.
Well, that's, I wasn't going to go into that much detail, but since you broached that detail, I'm going to, it hit me, that particular episode. It struck me as, here we have a guy who acknowledges that perhaps he doesn't have a mental illness, right? But he's having a mental issue, and that is so important. If if you're the clerk at a library and you're having a mental issue that day, you're going to misfile somebody's book, right? But if you're a cop and you have a mental issue that day, you could have a scenario that unfolds like the one in the episode of John Gear. So, you really, man, you just really have to pay attention to that as a chief, as a captain of a police department. You really have to pay attention to that, and not, and perhaps I'm pushing the envelope here, but the people who cops aren't foot soldiers, right? But in the context of what is quickly becoming a military force in America, domestic military, their captains, their chiefs, I believe, should be therefore held accountable in the same way a military tribunal would hold accountable a captain or a commander for one of his officers stepping out of line, and they're not. They drop it back down to the officer in many cases, and sadly, as we've seen with this officer, they just kind of move him around, making him somebody else's problem until he retires. And I'm kind of curious as to why that happens that way in journalism. If there was a journalist who cooked up a story, just straight up lied on the paper, he would be disgraced. He'd never work in a publication again of any reputable note. And yet no journalist that I know is licensed to kill. So that's kind of a sharp punch, perhaps, but it's my opinion on that episode.
Oh, no. Actually, you brought up 2 points. So in that case, in that John Gear episode, I think his partner was in the car with him when John was on the phone having this verbal confrontation with his wife. I think that's the first person who should have intervened, like, hey, you're visibly upset. You've been on the phone for 15 minutes. You chill out in the car. I'll take care of it, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because he saw that he was visibly upset and,
right.
Arguing with his wife. I think that's probably one of the first things that should have happened, but I don't know if he just kind of seen this before and, okay, the guy was all right, let him go do his job, but I don't know. But I feel like he was there with him in the car. He should have said something like, you're very upset, why don't you cool off in the car, I'll take care of it,
Right.
But that didn't happen that way, unfortunately. And then in terms of I lost my train of thought. I was going to say that these types of problems, like, they happen all the time. And I think that especially when if in the military, they have a better hold on who is having these problems. Like, they do a lot of check-ins, and I just don't understand why it's not happening more frequently with police. Now, I understand you can't do it every month. That might be overtaxing to the department, but maybe quarterly, just a check-in. These are our frontline people. They go out in the community. They work with a variety of people. It's taxing on them, and just a little check-in, and then if they are having some problems, maybe it'll be divulged in that conversation, and then we can take it from there and make the necessary adjustments. But not checking in with them until a crime happens or a major incident, I think it's too late.
Right. Yeah. It's not a simple issue. A very complex issue for sure. And on that note, I'm kind of curious. This is one of those thought-provoking questions that I was ruminating on when I heard your very first podcast several months ago, I think. And the question is this: if you woke up one day and got the news that your efforts in seeking police reform had paid off in full, and that the entire country had decided to revamp their entire culture of policing tactics based on your podcast and your research and your directives, what would that look like? How would policing happen per your sort of worldview, if you will, of police reform?
Well, I would say it would just be from the primary moment that they join the force. I think it would start with the types of training that's being implemented. A lot of it is, I would say, outdated, mediocre training that's, passed on from years and years. We need more updated things that are relevant to our times. I think I think that it would start with embedding a lot of mental health into their training, not just a quick little crash course. But I also think it could go back as the departments are looking to revamp. They would have to go through your files and weed out those bad apples. I think there's a lot of times people are, you know, given a clean slate, given several opportunities, and things get overlooked. And I think that my ideal vision of reform would entail doing a deep dive into the files and weeding out the people who are just not fit to be there.
Right. Yeah, because just as your podcast title might denote, few bad apples spoil the bunch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a metaphor that I wanted to go with because it really is just a few. There's so many good people, and I think that those people deserve to be commended and to be recognized, and I'm all for those people who are risking their lives daily. It's just a lot of times those unfortunate bad incidents give the whole department a negative light, and that's not good. We want to trust these people. They're the ones choosing to be there. They're not recruited. Well, they might be recruited, but they are making the commitment to do so. So I think it would change the way we view police. We want to have a positive viewpoint of them, but unfortunately a lot of people are scared and untrusting of them because of the things that have been happening lately.
Let's personalize this a little bit. You're in Hawaii, and I'm not going to, how do I ask this question? Sometimes I ask my mouth starts working on the question before my brain's done formalizing it. In Hawaii, communities are a little smaller there. I don't know where in Hawaii you live, and it's not necessary to say where, but it does the does the island culture of policing differ at all that you know of from the contiguous U.S.?
I think it does. I don't think they see the amount of crime there is crime here. There is crime, but I don't think they see the typical big metropolitan area types crimes like Los Angeles, which I'm actually from LA, so I have experience with seeing what the crime is like over there. But I don't think it's that big of an issue here. I just think that the police, I don't know, I feel like maybe it's a completely different place. So I can't really even compare the two. I just think it is definitely different. And for a while here, though, they just in the past 4 years, they had some serious internal problems with their department. And I think it's due to the nature of where we are and the islands, and everything's so interconnected with the different islands. But the chief of police, there was a corruption scandal with his wife, and I was looking into doing a story on it, but it's kind of a big one, so I don't know if I have the time right now to do it. But yeah, I do think they have similar problems that we would see on the mainland, but in terms of the grand scale crime that we see in the bigger cities, it's probably toned down quite a bit here. Right. The murder rate's not extremely high.
Sure. I asked that question. I've never been to Hawaii, but I've lived in a lot of small communities. I lived in Maine, which total of 1 million people statewide. I've lived in, tons of Alaska, the state of Alaska is they call it the smallest state in America because it's got more bears than it does people. Yeah. And, really, you're guaranteed to run into somebody no matter where you're at in Alaska. You met them in Anchorage. You'll see them in Talkeetna or something 6 months later or something. It's bound to happen. It's very strange, and everything in between. Right, the big cities like LA, they all have a different sort of flavor of. I'll say policing. That's probably not the word that I'm shooting for, but the focus of that training is created based on the environment those police will be working in, and that has probably the greatest impact on the relations between the community and the police. And that's a big big problem right now. The documentary that I'm working on right now, two candidates were competing for the sheriff's seat. One was a civilian who was harassed by the police, and the other one was a chief who mutinied against the former chief that was in power. So both of them were campaigning against police corruption, but from two very different perspectives. And you can't make this stuff up. I mean, every single community, the small communities all the way up to the big communities, there's always going to be issues that test and push the envelope of what scenarios are we going to run into? So how do you categorize that and how do you deal with it? So it's a big challenge that you've got on there, and I commend you for all the work you're putting into it. And thanks for making a great show.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I really do it just to inform. I want people to know about this problem, and I know it's very uncomfortable. I've had even my good friends say, it's painful sometimes to listen, and I know it is. It's actually painful for me to write the story out, but it is uncomfortable. But we should keep talking about it because it's a problem that I don't see it going away. We're still seeing it. A brand new story just came out like a couple days ago. So that's the goal, is we need to keep talking about it and push for change, positive change. I don't want to abolish the police because I don't think that I, as a regular citizen, could do any policing of my own. I think there's a good system in place. It's just the training behind it. We just need to start from there. I think we will see differences if we do that. So thank you.
All right. Well, one final thanks for being on the show, and do me a favor, tell folks where again you can be found online.
You can follow me on Twitter at Few Apples or Instagram at A Few Bad Apples Pod, and both of those social medias have the link to my link tree, and that will help you find the show so you can listen, download, subscribe, and even if you want to be nice, you could even leave a little review just so I know what you're thinking.
Awesome, Katherine. Well, thanks again for talking today, and hopefully we can get you back on to talk about any progress or good news upcoming on the horizon.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
That's it for this edition of Legally Insane News. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Kyle O'Donnell for updates and extras on this and other stories. If you're listening to this podcast at legallyinsanefilms.com or the Small Town Justice page, be sure to also download the Spreaker app, where you can directly subscribe and help me bump up my download totals. If you like this episode of Legally Insane News, consider becoming a supporting member. For just $3, you can get access to members-only unreleased articles and podcasts, case files on our latest investigations, updates for events and conventions that we're attending, and discounts on swag. To do that, just head over to patreon.com/legallyinsanefilms. There are 3 different memberships, each with more content than the one before. This is where I release all of my documentary films with outtakes and extras, as well as another podcast called Small Town Justice. You can check those out by going to legallyinsanefilms.com and clicking Join the Fan Club. Send any questions, comments, feedback, and show ideas to thejusticepod@gmail.com. This has been a production of Legally Insane Films, LLC. I'm your host, Kyle O'Donnell. We'll see you next time.